It was a quiet, warm afternoon in a small suburban town. The streets were calm, the sun shining gently, and the usual rhythm of daily life was happening all around. Children played on sidewalks, neighbors waved at each other, and cars moved slowly along the roads, carrying people to their destinations. In the center of the town, there was a supermarket, a place where people came not just to buy food but also to see familiar faces and catch up on small town news. It was the kind of store where everyone knew everyone, and the atmosphere was usually relaxed and friendly. Inside the supermarket, the aisles were full of shoppers moving at their own pace. Some were picking vegetables and fruits carefully, checking their ripeness. Others moved quickly, holding shopping lists in their hands, making sure not to forget anything important. The shelves were neatly arranged, with fresh produce on one side and packaged goods on the other. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee from the small cafe in the corner. People chatted softly as they walked through the aisles, some smiling at friends they passed, others focused on the task of getting their groceries quickly. Among the shoppers that day was an FBI agent, someone trained to notice details and act calmly in situations where others might panic. He was in plain clothes, dressed simply in a jacket and jeans, carrying a shopping basket in one hand. He moved carefully through the store, picking up items he needed, from fresh vegetables to some basic household supplies. He was tired from a week full of investigations, interviews, and late-night work, and today he simply wanted to do something normal, like anyone else, buy groceries and go home. At the same time, in the supermarket parking lot, a police officer was finishing his shift. He had a reputation in the department, one that many people whispered about quietly. He was known to be quick to anger, often acting before thinking, and he sometimes treated people unfairly, especially those who were different from him or who he saw as outsiders. That day, he was on duty but not paying close attention to what really mattered, just looking around, letting his assumptions guide his decisions. The tension in the supermarket had reached a peak. Shoppers were frozen in their tracks, watching the situation unfold, unable to believe what they were seeing. What had started as a normal afternoon shopping trip had transformed into a moment of high tension and potential danger. The officer stood rigid, his hand dangerously close to his gun, while the FBI agent remained calm, composed, and fully aware of how quickly the situation could escalate if he or the officer made a wrong move. In the days following the incident, the city was still buzzing with conversations about what had happened at the supermarket. Local news stations continued to report updates, highlighting how quickly and professionally the situation had been handled. The story had become an example of both the dangers of bias and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. People in the community discussed how fortunate it was that the confrontation had ended without anyone being hurt. The federal agent's calmness had prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. The police department continued its internal review of policies and procedures. Meetings were held with officers to discuss bias awareness, professional conduct, and the correct use of force. The police chief spoke openly about the incident, using it as a teaching moment. He emphasized that officers must always assess a situation carefully and avoid assumptions. Personal feelings or prejudices could never replace judgment based on facts and training. The chief wanted his department to learn from the mistake and prevent similar situations in the future. Meanwhile, the terminated officer faced not only career consequences but also public scrutiny. Local newspapers had shared his actions, and social media posts about the incident had spread widely. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors expressed a mixture of reactions, ranging from shock to disappointment. The officer understood that his actions had consequences far beyond his own life. His poor judgment had endangered a federal agent, shaken public trust, and harmed the reputation of his police department. He had to confront the reality of his mistake and figure out how to move forward. The federal agent, despite being at the center of a tense confrontation, continued his daily routine. He returned to work and remained focused on his responsibilities, but he also reflected on the incident. He realized how quickly bias and misunderstanding could turn a simple situation into a dangerous one. He hoped that the public discussion and the police department's actions would serve as a positive lesson for others in law enforcement and the community. His professionalism and patience had not only protected lives but had also strengthened the relationship between federal and local law enforcement agencies. The supermarket where the incident occurred took steps to improve safety and training. Employees were given additional guidance on how to handle tense situations, including how to assist law enforcement and protect customers during emergencies. Security cameras were reviewed and upgraded where necessary, ensuring that future incidents could be monitored clearly. Staff members who had remained calm during the confrontation were praised, and management made sure everyone understood the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. Community leaders also stepped in to encourage dialogue and awareness. They held town hall meetings where residents could share their experiences and concerns about public safety, law enforcement practices, and bias. Many citizens expressed relief that the incident had ended without harm, but they also emphasized the need for continued education and accountability. The discussions highlighted how public awareness, proper training, and clear communication could prevent misunderstandings and dangerous situations in everyday life. The terminated officer sought advice from legal and professional counselors. He realized that he had to accept responsibility for his actions and that there was no quick solution to restore his career. He considered retraining and education opportunities that focused on bias awareness, emotional control, and conflict resolution. Although he could not undo what had happened, he began to take steps toward personal growth and reflection, understanding that change was necessary if he hoped to rebuild trust in the future. Meanwhile, the federal agent's story became a case study in professional training programs. Law enforcement agencies across the region used the incident to teach officers about the importance of remaining calm, verifying facts, and de-escalating tense situations. Trainees were shown the video footage and given detailed explanations of what went right and what went wrong. The agent's behavior became a model of professionalism, demonstrating how patience and composure could prevent a potentially dangerous confrontation. The incident also sparked broader community conversations about bias and assumptions. People began to discuss how judgment could be clouded by stereotypes, personal opinions, or rushed conclusions. Schools, community centers, and civic organizations incorporated discussions about bias awareness and respectful behavior into their programs. The story of the supermarket confrontation served as a real-life example of why careful thinking and empathy are so important in everyday interactions. The supermarket itself took pride in how the staff handled the situation. Employees shared their experiences and reflected on how remaining calm and cooperative had helped protect everyone. They recognized the value of teamwork, communication, and attentiveness. While the incident had been frightening at the moment, it became an opportunity for learning and growth. Staff members felt more prepared to assist in emergencies and more confident in their ability to stay composed under pressure. The community continued to follow the story as the police department completed its review. The chief maintained transparency, providing updates about the officer's termination and the steps being taken to prevent similar incidents. Public trust in the department improved because people saw that accountability was enforced and that safety was a top priority. Citizens appreciated the openness and the clear message that misconduct would not be tolerated. The terminated officer faced personal reflection during this time. He thought deeply about how assumptions and personal biases had influenced his behavior. He realized that fear, pride, and lack of self-control had led him to make a critical mistake. Although the consequences were serious, he began to understand that acknowledging his errors and committing to change were the first steps toward learning from the experience. Counseling and professional guidance became part of his journey to better understand himself and his responsibilities. Meanwhile, the federal agent continued to be recognized for his calm and effective handling of the situation. His agency and colleagues praised him, noting how his professionalism had prevented harm and reinforced the importance of proper conduct. He remained humble about the attention, emphasizing that he had simply followed protocol and acted with patience. His focus was on ensuring safety, both for himself and for those around him, and his actions spoke louder than words to anyone observing the situation. As time passed, the supermarket, law enforcement agencies, and the community used the incident as an example of how to prevent dangerous situations. Policies were reviewed, training was reinforced, and public discussions emphasized the importance of professionalism, composure, and awareness. The story became an educational moment, demonstrating the value of calm thinking, patience, and accountability in public spaces. The local media covered follow-up stories that highlighted the positive outcomes. They focused on how no one was hurt, how the officer was held accountable, and how the federal agent's professionalism prevented escalation. Community leaders praised the swift and transparent actions of the police chief. Residents expressed relief and gratitude for the way the situation had been handled. The narrative emphasized learning, reflection, and growth rather than only blame or punishment. Even among shoppers who had witnessed the event firsthand, the lesson was clear. They remembered the fear, tension, and uncertainty, but they also saw how calmness, professionalism, and quick action could prevent tragedy. Parents explained the situation to their children in simple terms, emphasizing the importance of patience, understanding, and cooperation. The story became a shared memory that reminded everyone of the consequences of assumptions and the value of responsible behavior. In the end, the incident became more than just a confrontation at a supermarket. It was a story about accountability, professionalism, and learning from mistakes. The terminated officer faced the consequences of his actions but also had an opportunity for reflection and growth. The federal agent demonstrated the power of calmness and training. The police department reinforced policies and training, ensuring that officers understood the importance of careful judgment and bias awareness. The community learned that even ordinary places could become the site of serious incidents, but that careful, professional, and patient behavior could prevent harm. The supermarket resumed its daily routine fully, but the memory of the incident remained. Employees felt more confident in their ability to handle emergencies, shoppers were reminded to stay aware, and law enforcement agencies continued to emphasize professionalism and accountability. Everyone involved understood the lesson clearly: assumptions and bias can create danger, but calmness, training, and proper conduct can prevent it. In the weeks and months that followed, the story continued to be shared in professional training programs, community discussions, and personal conversations. The lessons learned extended far beyond the supermarket, influencing how officers, community members, and ordinary citizens thought about judgment, bias, and responsibility. The federal agent returned to his duties with confidence, knowing that his calm and professional actions had made a real difference. The incident ultimately left a lasting impact. The city, the police department, the supermarket, and the people involved had all learned valuable lessons about responsibility, professional conduct, and the consequences of assumptions. While it had started as a tense and dangerous confrontation, it ended with reflection, education, and a commitment to improvement. The community, law enforcement, and the individuals involved all emerged stronger and more aware, ready to face future challenges with professionalism, patience, and respect for others. Nearby, the store manager stayed close, keeping an eye on both men, making sure no one else accidentally walked into the confrontation. He had already contacted the police department, explaining that one of their own officers was pointing a gun at a federal agent in public. His voice had been calm but urgent, knowing that this report could prevent a disaster if help arrived quickly. As he watched, he could feel the tension in the room, the silent energy of fear and concern radiating from shoppers around them. After the tense situation in the supermarket had been contained, the backup officers guided the original officer out of the aisle. The shoppers slowly returned to browsing, still whispering nervously, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The store manager stayed close to ensure that everyone was calm and safe, while the federal agent, having kept his composure throughout the incident, quietly finished paying for his items. He was polite to the cashier, who had been visibly shaken but managed to maintain a professional attitude under the pressure of the unfolding events. Once the agent had left the supermarket safely, the backup officers began documenting the incident in detail. They asked the original officer to explain his actions and started taking statements from witnesses. The officer's hands shook slightly as he recounted what had happened. He seemed aware that his behavior had been inappropriate, but he struggled to fully articulate why he had acted as he did. His bias and assumptions had clouded his judgment, and now the reality of his actions began to sink in. Meanwhile, the store manager cooperated fully with the officers. He provided security camera footage, which clearly showed the entire confrontation from start to finish. The footage revealed the calm and professional behavior of the FBI agent, the tense and aggressive stance of the officer, and the reaction of the bystanders. It was undeniable evidence of the officer's mistake. The manager felt a mix of relief and frustration, relief that no one had been hurt, and frustration that such a dangerous situation had even occurred in a public space. The police department's chief was informed immediately. He was a leader who believed in accountability and proper conduct. Upon hearing the report and reviewing the footage, he acted quickly. The chief understood the seriousness of the incident. An officer pointing a gun at a federal agent in public was not just a mistake, it was a breach of trust, protocol, and professional ethics. He immediately called for an internal review and prepared to take decisive action. The officer was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He was escorted to a quiet room at the police station, away from public view. Here, he faced a detailed interview with senior officers and internal affairs investigators. They asked him to explain why he had drawn his weapon and threatened a federal agent in public. At first, the officer tried to justify his actions by claiming he felt threatened or that he was just following instinct. However, the evidence, especially the video footage and witness statements, made it impossible for him to provide a credible defense. As the internal review proceeded, the officer's supervisors examined his training records, previous behavior, and evaluations. It became clear that, although he had completed all standard training, he had a history of showing impatience and reacting emotionally in stressful situations. This incident, however, was the most serious of his career. The chief knew that allowing the officer to return to active duty without consequences would send the wrong message, not only to the public but also to the rest of the police force. Accountability was necessary. Meanwhile, the federal agent had already submitted a formal complaint through official channels. He was professional and calm in his report, detailing the incident factually and without exaggeration. He highlighted how he had maintained composure, followed protocol, and ensured the safety of everyone present. His report emphasized the officer's lack of judgment and the potential danger he had caused. Agency leadership reviewed the report carefully and coordinated with the local police department to ensure that proper actions would be taken. The story began to reach the public. Local news outlets reported the incident, but they were careful to focus on facts. Headlines highlighted that the officer had pointed a gun at a federal agent in a supermarket and had been placed on leave while the police chief conducted a full investigation. Many members of the community were shocked. People expressed support for the FBI agent and gratitude that no one had been harmed. Social media discussions exploded, with citizens debating police accountability, bias, and professional conduct. Many praised the agent for his calm and professional handling of the situation. The officer, now fully aware of the scrutiny he faced, began to reflect on his actions. He realized that his assumptions, fueled by personal prejudice, had caused unnecessary danger and embarrassment. He felt a mix of shame, fear, and regret. He understood that this incident could end his career in law enforcement and that he would have to face the consequences of his behavior. His training and experience had not been enough to prevent him from making a critical mistake when personal bias interfered with judgment. The police chief held a department meeting to address the incident. He spoke to all officers about the importance of professionalism, bias awareness, and the consequences of overreacting in high-stress situations. He emphasized that officers must always assess situations carefully, verify facts, and maintain control, no matter how tense the circumstances might seem. The chief's message was clear: accountability and training go hand in hand, and any officer who fails to uphold these standards would face consequences. After reviewing all the evidence, including eyewitness statements, video footage, and the officer's own admission, the chief made a decisive move. He terminated the officer's employment immediately. The decision was announced publicly, reinforcing the message that such behavior would not be tolerated. The chief explained that the officer's actions had endangered both the public and fellow law enforcement professionals and that termination was the appropriate response. The community reacted positively, appreciating the transparency and commitment to accountability. The officer left the department, facing not only career consequences but also the personal challenge of rebuilding his life and reputation. Friends and family expressed mixed feelings, some sympathetic, others critical. He realized that his actions had consequences far beyond his own career. They had shaken public trust, endangered lives, and left a lasting mark on his record. He had to confront the reality of what bias and poor judgment could lead to and learn from it, though the path forward would be difficult. Meanwhile, the FBI agent received recognition from his agency for handling the situation with professionalism and composure. He continued his work without incident, though he remained aware of how quickly things could have escalated. He reflected on the importance of training, patience, and staying calm under pressure. His ability to handle the confrontation without resorting to aggression had prevented a dangerous incident and served as an example for other law enforcement professionals. The supermarket returned to its normal routine over the following days, though employees and shoppers who had witnessed the incident would remember it for a long time. Staff meetings were held to discuss emergency protocols and how to respond to tense situations. Employees received praise for remaining calm and helping maintain safety during the confrontation. The incident became a case study in professional behavior, demonstrating the critical difference between calm, trained responses and reactive, biased actions. Community members expressed appreciation for the swift actions taken by the police chief and the FBI agent. Public forums discussed the importance of bias awareness, accountability, and proper training in law enforcement. Many hoped that the incident would serve as a reminder to all officers that personal assumptions could have dangerous consequences. It became a story that emphasized responsibility, professionalism, and the importance of protecting the public's trust. By the end of the week, the city had moved forward, but the lessons of the incident remained. Law enforcement agencies reviewed their training, emphasizing de-escalation techniques, proper identification verification, and awareness of personal biases. The terminated officer's actions were cited as an example of what could go wrong when judgment is clouded by assumptions rather than facts. Meanwhile, the FBI agent continued his work, his reputation strengthened by his calm and professional handling of a potentially dangerous situation. The incident left a lasting mark on everyone involved. Shoppers who had witnessed it shared the story with friends and family, explaining how a calm approach prevented disaster. The supermarket staff remained proud of their response and the safety measures they had followed. The police department, while dealing with the embarrassment of one officer's misconduct, gained an opportunity to reinforce professional standards and demonstrate the importance of accountability. The story served as a reminder that careful judgment, professionalism, and respect. The FBI agent, noticing the rising anxiety among people nearby, spoke again. His voice was steady, clear, and calm, carrying authority without aggression. "Please, everyone, stay calm. Nobody needs to get hurt. I am here to shop, nothing more. Let's resolve this peacefully." His words were not just directed at the officer, they were meant to reassure everyone else in the store. It was a quiet but powerful effort to restore some sense of control in a situation that could have spiraled into chaos. The officer, however, remained tense. His fingers tightened around the grip of his weapon, his jaw clenched, and his eyes narrowed as he stared at the agent. His training as a law enforcement officer was meant to prepare him for danger, but his personal bias clouded his judgment. Instead of recognizing that this was a peaceful, off-duty federal agent, he saw only suspicion and imagined threats. The officer's assumptions had built a wall between perception and reality, and that wall was dangerous. Around them, shoppers whispered nervously to each other. Some were parents holding children close, while others discreetly took videos on their phones. One young man quietly stepped back, holding the door for an older woman to leave safely. The atmosphere in the supermarket had shifted completely. What had been the familiar comfort of routine shopping had become a tense standoff where every movement, every word, could trigger a sudden reaction. People were aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that they might later tell others about, but no one knew exactly how it would end. The agent took another careful step back, keeping his hands clearly visible. He spoke in a calm, measured voice, "Sir, I am only here to shop. I have no intention of threatening you or anyone else. Please lower your weapon so we can solve this safely." His posture was non-threatening but confident. He understood that calmness and professionalism were his strongest tools. Shoppers noticed the contrast between the two men, one calm and composed, relying on training and reason, and the other tense and reactive, relying on suspicion and bias. At that moment, one of the bystanders, a retired police officer who was quietly observing, whispered to the manager, "That officer is overreacting. He needs to step back and calm down." The manager nodded subtly but remained cautious, knowing that speaking directly could worsen the situation. He was carefully monitoring body language, facial expressions, and small movements, all of which could influence the outcome. Every person in the aisle was now part of a delicate balance of tension, waiting for the right moment to defuse the situation safely. The officer finally spoke, his voice sharp and demanding, "Why are you hiding your identification until now? Who sent you here? What is your purpose?" His questions were aggressive, designed to assert authority, but they revealed his growing confusion. He was beginning to realize that this was not a typical encounter, that the man before him was not what he had assumed. Yet his ego and impatience prevented him from immediately lowering his weapon. The agent responded slowly, carefully, and clearly, "I showed my identification the moment I could safely. I am here as a private citizen. I am off duty. My work does not involve threatening anyone in this store." He remained calm and steady, making sure his words and tone reinforced his message. He did not argue, yell, or challenge the officer aggressively. He simply stated facts and let them speak for themselves. His professionalism created a stark contrast, making the officer's reaction appear increasingly irrational to anyone watching. The officer, though still tense, began to hesitate. The words of the agent, combined with the careful observation of the bystanders and the store manager's calm presence, were starting to influence him. He took a slight step back, but his hand remained dangerously close to the gun. His pride and previous assumptions still held him in a state of tension. He was beginning to realize that he might have misjudged the situation, but his ego and lack of self-control made it difficult for him to act wisely. At that moment, the first backup officers arrived outside the store. Their presence was immediate but not intrusive. One quietly entered the store, maintaining a calm demeanor, and addressed the officer firmly but without aggression, "Officer, step back. Let's resolve this safely." The words were clear, authoritative, and unthreatening, designed to encourage the officer to reconsider his actions without making him feel humiliated. The agent remained calm, understanding that the arrival of backup could either escalate or de-escalate the situation depending on how everyone acted. Shoppers noticed the additional police presence and quietly moved to create space. Parents gently guided children away from the immediate area, while others continued to record on their phones. The tension in the store was still high, but the arrival of other officers began to shift the balance. The situation now had more control, more people trained to handle potential threats, and more authority to ensure that no one would be harmed. The agent spoke again, his voice calm and measured. "Thank you for arriving. This situation can be resolved peacefully. Please help ensure everyone stays safe." His words were directed at both the backup officers and the original officer, reinforcing the need for calm and measured action. The shoppers watched, impressed by his ability to maintain composure under pressure. Even the tense officer, still holding his weapon, was beginning to feel the weight of his actions. The manager quietly guided some of the nearest shoppers to a safer part of the store. He whispered reassurance to them, explaining that trained officers were now present and that everyone should remain calm. Shoppers complied, understanding the seriousness of the situation but trusting that professionals were now in control. The atmosphere, while still tense, began to shift toward resolution rather than confrontation. The officer finally spoke again, his voice shaky but less aggressive. I thought," he paused, struggling to find words. His bias and assumptions were starting to collide with reality. The agent remained calm, giving him space to realize his mistake without provoking anger. "Sir," the agent said gently, "there is no threat here. You don't need to use your weapon. Let's resolve this safely." His words were firm but kind, showing understanding without criticism. The backup officers approached the original officer carefully, maintaining calm body language and speaking in low, authoritative tones. They gently instructed him to lower his weapon. The officer hesitated but eventually complied, placing his hand on his side holster and stepping back. The tension in the aisle began to ease slightly. Shoppers released quiet breaths of relief, and some clapped softly, recognizing that a potentially dangerous situation had been contained without violence. The agent, still calm, lowered his own posture slightly to signal non-threat. "Thank you," he said, addressing both the officer and the backup team. "Everyone is safe now. This can end peacefully." The words were simple but effective, reassuring both law enforcement and civilians that the situation had reached a turning point. The supermarket, once filled with routine activity, had become a lesson in professionalism, calmness, and the dangers of bias, and now it was beginning to return to normalcy. The original officer, now off balance and embarrassed, realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had pointed a gun at a federal agent, caused fear in public, and let his assumptions override reason. The agent, by remaining composed and professional, had prevented any harm and had allowed the situation to resolve safely. The shoppers, employees, and backup officers witnessed a powerful example of patience, training, and self-control in action. By this point, the store manager spoke softly to the officer, guiding him to step aside while explaining that the situation would be reviewed. The agent continued to maintain calm, ensuring that everyone remained safe and that no further escalation could occur. Phones continued to record, but now the scene was one of resolution rather than immediate danger. The energy in the store slowly shifted from fear to cautious relief, with shoppers whispering among themselves and employees quietly returning to their duties. It was a moment that would be remembered by those who witnessed it. An ordinary shopping trip turned into a high-stakes confrontation, handled without violence thanks to the professionalism, calm, and patience of a trained federal agent. The dangerous potential of bias and assumption was on full display, showing just how quickly ordinary life could be disrupted by someone acting on prejudice rather than fact. The officer noticed the man moving through the store and something about him caught his attention. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but it made the officer suspicious. The man's calm demeanor, his quiet movements, and the way he carried himself made the officer uneasy. He began to feel that something was not right, even though there was no evidence of anything wrong. But in that moment, the officer's own bias and impatience started to take over. His mind began imagining threats where there were none. His hand instinctively moved near his belt, near his holstered gun, as if preparing for something that might never come. The officer took another step closer, his eyes fixed on the FBI agent. His hand twitched near his holster, a movement that immediately caught the attention of everyone in the aisle. The air grew heavier with tension. Shoppers began to notice that something unusual was happening. Mothers holding children paused mid-step, and a few people whispered to each other, trying to understand the confrontation. Phones were quietly raised by bystanders, recording the unfolding situation. Some shoppers were frozen, unsure of whether to step away or intervene verbally. The normally calm supermarket was slowly turning into a scene of alarm, all because of one officer's assumptions. The FBI agent, understanding the danger, remained calm and controlled. He did not make any sudden moves. His training told him that reacting with anger or fear could escalate the situation further. Slowly, deliberately, he kept his hands visible, showing no threat, and looked directly at the officer. He spoke in a calm voice, clear and steady, "I am an FBI agent. Here is my identification." He held out his badge carefully, ensuring the officer could see it without making it appear threatening. Every gesture was calculated to reduce tension, not increase it. He understood that the officer's next actions could determine the safety of everyone in the store. For a moment, the officer hesitated, squinting at the badge, trying to read the words, trying to see if this was real. But his suspicion and bias were strong. Instead of lowering his hand, he kept his fingers close to his gun. His tone was harsh and impatient as he demanded again, "What are you doing here? Why are you in this store?" The words sounded accusatory and heavy, carrying the weight of assumption rather than fact. The officer's body language made it clear he thought the agent was guilty of something. His voice was loud enough that nearby shoppers could hear, and some began to glance nervously, wondering how far this confrontation would go. The agent continued to remain calm. He spoke slowly, giving clear answers to the officer's questions. "I am here to buy groceries, just like everyone else. I am not doing anything illegal. I work for the FBI, and I am off duty, but I am allowed to be here." His tone was professional, measured, and firm. He avoided anger, sarcasm, or anything that could provoke the officer. Instead, he focused on facts, using words to clarify the situation rather than escalate it. He knew that showing control and confidence was important, both to protect himself and to prevent panic in the store. The officer's face grew red with frustration. He was not used to being questioned or calmly corrected. His bias against people who were different from him, combined with his impatience, fueled the anger he felt. He shifted slightly, moving closer to the agent, his hand brushing near his gun. The shoppers around them moved subtly to create space, sensing danger without fully understanding it. Some whispered among themselves, trying to reassure each other, while others quietly continued filming, capturing evidence in case the situation got worse. The agent, noticing the officer's tension, continued to speak in a calm, reassuring voice. "There is no reason to escalate this. I am not a threat. I am only here to do what everyone else does, shop." His words were steady, but he also made sure to maintain eye contact, signaling confidence and honesty. He understood that panic or sudden movements could trigger an unnecessary and dangerous response. Every word and gesture was designed to de-escalate the situation, to remind the officer that this was a misunderstanding that could be resolved without violence. Meanwhile, the officer struggled to maintain control over his own emotions. He felt frustrated that someone was not immediately complying with his assumptions. He wanted to assert power, to show authority, but he was confronted by calm professionalism. Every instinct he had to act aggressively was challenged by the agent's composed demeanor. This internal conflict created a strange tension that everyone in the store could feel, even if they did not understand the full reason for it. The store manager, now fully aware of the situation, quietly approached from behind a shelf, keeping a safe distance. He noticed the officer's gun and the agent's calm posture. He immediately realized that this could become a serious incident. Without making sudden movements, he called out softly, "Sir, please step back and let's resolve this safely." His voice was firm but non-threatening, meant to intervene without escalating fear. Shoppers around them glanced nervously, understanding that an authority figure was trying to keep the situation under control. Other store employees and nearby customers began to pay close attention. Some whispered to each other, noting that the officer's actions seemed extreme and unnecessary. Phones continued to record, capturing every detail for evidence later. The energy in the store was tense but controlled, like a thin line between normal life and a possible crisis. People instinctively moved to create space around the officer and the agent, trying to protect themselves without causing panic. The officer's hand stayed near his gun, trembling slightly with frustration and tension. His eyes narrowed, scanning the agent for any sign of threat. Yet the agent remained composed, carefully avoiding sudden movements, speaking calmly, and keeping his hands visible at all times. "I understand you have a job to do," the agent said, "but there is no need to point your weapon. We can resolve this with words." His calmness contrasted sharply with the officer's tension, highlighting the dangerous imbalance in the situation. Nearby shoppers, realizing the seriousness of the confrontation, began to whisper warnings and advice quietly among themselves. "He's an FBI agent," one said softly. "Just let him show his badge." Others were silent, holding their breath and hoping the situation would end peacefully. The store, once filled with ordinary shopping activity, had transformed into a scene of high tension, watched closely by people who had only come for groceries. The officer, despite seeing the badge, seemed unwilling to immediately accept the truth. His frustration grew, mixing with bias, anger, and a sense of authority he felt was being challenged. Every second that passed without a clear resolution added pressure to the situation. It was like a match being held too close to dry kindling; any sudden spark could lead to disaster. But the agent continued to remain calm, relying on training and experience to prevent the worst outcome. At that moment, the agent carefully explained his actions again. "I am off duty, shopping like everyone else. I am not a threat. Please lower your weapon so we can discuss this safely." His tone was firm but polite, designed to show respect while asserting safety. He did not shout, yell, or show anger, understanding that remaining calm was the only way to prevent escalation. His posture was relaxed but confident, demonstrating control over the situation, even as the officer's hands remained close to the holster. Shoppers around them continued to record silently. They whispered to each other, noting that the agent seemed calm and professional while the officer's behavior was aggressive. Some moved slightly, trying to give the two men more space. Others froze, watching closely, their hearts racing with worry. Everyone understood, even without knowing the law or proper procedures, that pointing a gun in a public space was dangerous and wrong. Then, the agent took another careful step backward, keeping his hands visible and speaking clearly, "Sir, there is no need to escalate. We can handle this together." His voice carried authority without aggression, a combination of calmness and confidence that demanded respect. Shoppers noticed the difference between the two men, one acting on assumption and bias, the other acting on training, knowledge, and professionalism. The contrast made the officer's behavior appear even more extreme and unreasonable. The store manager, realizing the severity of the situation, called the police department for help. He kept his voice calm, explaining that an officer was pointing a gun at a federal agent and that the situation could become dangerous. Within minutes, backup officers were dispatched. Meanwhile, in the store, the tension remained high, but the presence of the manager and the calm demeanor of the agent helped keep things under control. Shoppers continued to watch, some whispering to each other, while phones recorded every moment for evidence. In those moments, it became clear that the ordinary act of shopping had turned into a potentially dangerous confrontation. The officer's assumptions and bias, combined with his quick judgment, created a situation that could have ended badly. But the agent's calm, professional, and measured response prevented disaster. His training, patience, and self-control were the only reasons that no one was hurt as the situation unfolded. Finally, the FBI agent continued to keep his hands visible, speaking calmly, explaining clearly, and demonstrating that he was not a threat. He understood the power of patience, words, and calmness in a situation where anger and bias could lead to danger. Every movement, every word, was designed to prevent escalation and protect everyone in the store. Shoppers watched, aware that they were witnessing a lesson in professionalism, restraint, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. The scene in the supermarket had now reached a critical point. The officer had not yet lowered his weapon, the agent remained calm and professional, and the shoppers were tense but observing carefully. The incident was no longer just a misunderstanding, it was a lesson in human behavior, training, and the dangerous consequences of acting on bias and assumption. The situation could still go either way, and every second that passed added both tension and urgency to resolve the confrontation safely. Inside the store, the FBI agent was completely unaware of the growing tension outside and inside. He moved from aisle to aisle, placing items in his basket. He greeted the cashier with a friendly smile, thanked the staff who helped him reach an item on a higher shelf, and continued his shopping with a quiet focus. Every action he took was ordinary, simple, and completely normal. But his calm and confidence, which for anyone else would be a sign of relaxation, for the officer outside became a reason to worry. The officer decided he needed to investigate this man, not realizing that he was about to make a huge mistake that could have serious consequences. As the officer walked into the store, the atmosphere started to shift. Shoppers didn't notice at first, but there was a subtle change in the air. People subconsciously stepped back, sensing a tension they couldn't yet see. The officer's eyes were fixed on the man with the shopping basket. His steps were deliberate, moving closer with a sense of purpose, and his body language made it clear that he was not just another customer. He had made up his mind that something was wrong, and he was ready to act on that belief without thinking it through. The FBI agent, still focused on his groceries, didn't notice the officer approaching at first. He reached for a loaf of bread and then a carton of milk, carefully placing them in his basket. He hummed softly to himself, unaware of the eyes watching him with suspicion and anger. He paused near the cereal aisle, checking the options, when he finally saw the officer standing a few feet away. The officer's expression was tense, and his hand was hovering near his gun, an action that immediately signaled danger to anyone trained to notice threats. But the agent stayed calm, knowing that sudden movements or anger could escalate the situation. Nearby shoppers began to notice the interaction. Some whispered to each other, pointing subtly, while others paused in their tracks, sensing that something unusual was happening. Phones were quietly raised, recording the scene without the knowledge of the officer, capturing every moment of what would soon become a serious incident. The ordinary shopping trip was turning into a tense encounter, and the energy in the store shifted from calm to charged, even if most people didn't fully understand why yet. The officer stepped closer, his voice sharp, demanding to see identification. He didn't wait for an explanation. His body posture was aggressive, his tone loud enough to attract attention but not yet alarm. The FBI agent, recognizing the danger, took a deep breath. He moved slowly and deliberately, keeping his hands visible and showing that he was not a threat. He reached for his badge and carefully revealed his credentials, explaining that he was a federal agent and that he was simply shopping like anyone else. His voice was calm but firm, leaving no room for misunderstanding his intentions. Despite this, the officer hesitated. His face showed frustration and anger, emotions that were fueled by bias rather than fact. He did not immediately lower his hand or relax his posture. In fact, the officer seemed to become more determined to assert control, relying on assumptions rather than evidence. His eyes scanned the agent, as if looking for any excuse to escalate the situation further. Every movement he made increased the tension around them, making shoppers uneasy and alert. Meanwhile, other people in the store began paying closer attention. Some stopped what they were doing, watching the encounter unfold. A store employee quietly called the manager over, concerned about the potential danger. The manager approached slowly, assessing the situation without making sudden movements. He could see the officer's gun and the agent's calm posture, understanding immediately that this was not a normal confrontation. The manager's mind raced, thinking about how quickly things could go wrong and how to keep everyone safe. As this scene developed, the supermarket transformed from a place of routine shopping into a stage for a dangerous misunderstanding. The quiet background noise, the hum of refrigerators, the soft chatter of customers, the occasional beep of a scanner felt distant compared to the tension building between the officer and the agent. It was a moment where a small mistake, an impulsive action, or a misread signal could have serious consequences for everyone present. The FBI agent, trained to handle threats and unpredictable situations, continued to remain calm. He spoke in a steady voice, explaining clearly that he posed no threat, that he was in the store for personal reasons, and that escalation would not help anyone. His body language was non-threatening, yet confident. He did not flinch, raise his voice, or make any sudden movements that could be misinterpreted. Instead, he relied on training, experience, and a clear understanding of human behavior to de-escalate the moment. The officer, however, was caught in a cycle of anger and assumption. He could not yet see the truth of the situation, blinded by personal bias and quick judgment. Each step he took toward the agent increased the tension, but also increased the risk of making a mistake that could not be undone. Shoppers nearby whispered to each other, some frozen in place, others quietly moving to safer positions while recording the incident. This was a critical moment, a turning point where professionalism, patience, and calm thinking would clash with impulsive behavior, prejudice, and misunderstanding. The store, full of ordinary people trying to shop for groceries, had become the scene of a confrontation that could have ended badly but, for now, remained contained thanks to the agent's self-control and awareness. And so, the stage was fully set for what was about to happen. The quiet town, the ordinary supermarket, the calm FBI agent, and the impulsive officer were all on a collision course. The tension in the air was palpable, yet unnoticed by most. Shoppers were beginning to realize that something serious was unfolding before their eyes, and the first steps of action were about to change everyone's day, their understanding of law enforcement, and the consequences.